Let's talk to Helen Fields right now. She's a former criminal barrister and author and joins us now. Good afternoon to you, Helen.
Hello, Julia.
I mean, it's just harrowing what is coming out of the court. What little bit we have heard before this, the killer was taken out of court. First of all, can we just talk about the evidence that we're hearing now, which we would have heard in the court case had he not pleaded guilty? And we know that there was no planned defence. He refused to cooperate with his defence barristers, and it was a complete surprise to them when he did suddenly. He'd been silent in 5 previous court hearings, where people come to court many times, and then he entered this guilty plea to all 16 charges. Now he's being sentenced, but it's just been taken out of court. What do you make of what we'd already heard, just that he told police that he was happy that the children had died?
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary thing to hear, even given some of the terrible cases that our court system has dealt with in the past. It's a marker, really, of just how deeply deranged this young man must be. And I know that the defence lawyers have said that they won't be producing a psychiatric report, but there are issues about mental health. But what we now know, of course, is that this young man's problems and fascination with violence, terrible fascination, go back a really long way, to the extent that it's then the context of that he's been interested in all sorts of different organisations who have historically been guilty of violence. I'm not desperately surprised, but it's devastating. It takes an awful lot for families to go to court, to sit in a courtroom. It's a long journey from when the offences happen to get there. It's the very last thing they need to hear. And of course, the judge will be taking it into account, because people who are genuinely remorseful and who seem to be sorry from what they did from an early stage will get a more sympathetic hearing to an extent, although that extent is very small in a murder case. But the judge will take this into account. And when he's looking at, because of course the judge is today deciding what the minimum sentence will be before Rudakubana is eligible for parole, that's going to be a very high number.
Well, indeed. I mean, we knew early, as soon as the guilty plea went in, that he could not get a whole life tariff because he was 17. Is it 21 or 18? At which point that whole life tariff cannot be applied. In which case, even if he gets, a life sentence and then a minimum time, I mean, realistically, he could be out on the streets, in his 40s, could he not?
Well, he could, but I strongly suspect here that our worst concerns about that may not come to light. You're looking at the judge setting a minimum term before which he can even go before the parole board. But what will happen then is the parole board have to look at all the circumstances and be certain that he does not pose the same risk going out. I have to say, having looked at all the circumstances of this case and the young man's background and the extent to which agencies have been involved, it is possible that the Rudakubana will not be walking on our streets again for decades and decades, and thank goodness.
I mean, thank goodness. I would say never, but there we are. We understand that the sentencing hearing is going to continue without Axel Rudakubana. We understand he did not want to attend. He was brought in. We don't know. He was wearing a face mask, like a surgical mask. We don't know whether that was required. Because, I mean, as has been suggested by Philip Ingram, he might have been spitting at staff, or whether he, it was something he chose to do. We know he certainly used his in all previous hearings. Until we saw the guilty plea, we didn't see the mugshot, what he actually looks like. Right now we'd only had this lovely little angelic choir boy, aged 12, and he's always tried to cover his face. He's shouting in the dock that he was unwell. We know he'd been in hospital in the early hours. There seems to be some suggestion that it may have been an attempt at self-harm, possibly even a suicide attempt, but that we don't know that. That's people are suggesting this, but that he's now left the court. But there has been this issue in terms of people, killers, not hearing the sentencing, not being there also to hear the victim impact statements being read out by the family members. Lucy Letby, of course, famously just simply refused. We didn't find out for a long time because, of course, there were so many cases of the babies that she was accused of murdering and attempting to murder. It took weeks and weeks for that case to be allowed to be reported on publicly. But that she, after a period of time, I'm just not appearing in court. And then lots of calls for the law to be changed. But I believe the law has not actually being changed in time, to insist, no, you will sit there in court whether you like it or not, and you will hear that sentencing and hear those victim impact statements. What do you make of that?
No, the law hasn't changed yet. I suspect there will be changes coming.
Yeah.
I certainly hope so. The Lucy Letby thing was terrible. You know, the families are entitled to say their piece in front of the perpetrator of this level of violence. The problem is that more often than not, that when we bring people to court who don't want to be there, who don't agree to be there, is that they become disruptive and unpleasant. Even, I say that in the context of this, even more unpleasant when they're in the dock. Yeah. And they take the opportunity not to look repentant and not to listen. And in some ways it can be worse. So if you have someone who doesn't want to be there, then it can be very, very destructive. But I would say that we need to start looking at penalties for this, and whether or not that's, you know, the virtue of the prison governor saying, right then, if you don't turn up, then it's you know, you get no visits. Yeah. You get none of the sort of, you know, the very, very small amount of perks that our prison service allows. There has to be an ongoing system for making people take responsibility for those sorts of choices. I think it's probably right that the judge in this case just carries on in sentences. It's been too long in coming. It's too distressing. I think the idea for the parents of those girls that are coming back yet again would be equally awful. So there are no winners here. There's no good option. But what does need to happen is that Rudakubana needs to get as long a sentence as he can possibly get, and as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Well, while this continues, and we just to let you know, Rudakubana had shouted to the court, "I can't remain quiet," was told to stay quiet. And he said, "I can't remain quiet. I've not eaten for 10 days. I feel ill. I'm not going to remain quiet." And he shouted, "Don't continue," as the judge ordered him to be taken out. But one family member in the court did shout "coward" at Rudakubana as he left the dock. Other relatives, you know, shook their heads. Just incredibly distressing. We've had some more detail about what happened in the actual moment of this awful, awful rampage of murder. And we understand that the prosecution's lawyer has said that Rudakubana originally walked to a car body repair shop near Heartspace, where that Taylor Swift dance class was going on. But he entered the Taylor Swift dance class around 11:45, and he said, the lawyer said, within seconds of going into the building, screams could be heard coming from within. She also talked about how the yoga instructor, Leanne Lucas, the woman, the female adult who was one of the attempted murder charges, she felt a knife go into her back, and everyone ran towards the door of the dance class. And she recalled the evidence she would have given in court was that Rudakubana chased them as the children ran down the stairs. She told them, "Run away, run away." And they had CCTV footage which shows the child trying to leave the building before being pulled back into the building by Rudakubana and stabbed. I mean, Helen Fields, this is really harrowing stuff.
It is. It's incredibly harrowing. And, you know, no one prepares parents, but no one prepares, you know, friends, the community, police officers, paramedics for this sort of thing. Everyone's worst nightmare. You never think it's going to happen in your community. We do need to do more. I mean, there are big questions too. We know there's going to be a public inquiry, quite rightly, because the problem and the breakdown seems to me not to have been that this young man was referred to enough different agencies, but there's not enough cross-checking between agencies. So what happens is that every time there's an individual record, it's not touching up to something bigger, something more substantial.
But again, it's almost like that sort of, you know, domestic violence when it's treated as individual. Oh, you know, there's been this one instance not going well. Hold on, there's clearly a pattern of behaviour that says this person is desperately dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we need to get right. And I'm very hopeful that the public inquiry will look at the ways in which that should have happened. Yeah. It's of no consequence to the families. It's of no consequence to the loved ones today. No. The things that should have happened.
No, indeed.
Every time there's a case like this, we have to learn the lessons. There's going to be a time for that. It's not today. Yeah. But, you know, the whole of the system needs to learn the lessons from from these sort of things when we ignore clear signs of mental health.
I worry that we never do. I mean, can I ask you just, when we spoke to a journalist earlier, Charlie Bentley-Astor, she's been looking into a lot of the documents in public domain now, but what things that were on his computer. It does suggest that we know this Axel Rudakubana was obsessed with genocide, with beheadings, with extreme violence. He had this Al-Qaeda manual. We know all of that. But she thinks that he may have been obsessed with white genocide. He talked about Britain needing genocide like Rwanda to his school friends. He talked about the need for a white genocide at a football match. He appeared to be obsessed with ethnic cleansing. I'm wondering, whether this clearly seems to me to be coming under some sort of terrorism, a headline. And if this were the other way around and it was a white killer talking about black genocide or Muslim genocide, that this would clearly have been labelled as such. We would have known that straight away. It would have been called a far-right, racist killer. But the rules seem to be different when it's the other way around. Does any of that matter?
I don't think it's that the rules are different. I think that there's something happened here that we haven't seen before. And law only ever plays catch up. That's the problem with the system that we've got. It's inevitable. Yeah. And so the difficulty is that I think that after this, we need to have a good look at the intent and what really happened. I mean, I think one of the really horrendous things about this offence is that he chose little girls. He chose them in a dance studio where he was probably betting that there were only females. I think one of the families called him a coward. I think that's entirely correct. I think he went somewhere that he knew there was unlikely to be men, unlikely to be people that could stand up to him physically and challenge him. So I think, there are all sorts of aspects to this about his obsession that we need to look at really hard. And I know there's been talk about expanding the scope of terrorism. I think that has to be done in a careful, measured, sensible way. And I think also that we need to just rethink as human beings what terrorism is. They've looked at this harder, I think, in the States, where they look at domestic terrorism and what that really means. And I think there is some scope here, not just for blindly expanding what MI5 and the police need to do.
But looking into those motivations. Helen Fields, so appreciate you joining us. Really appreciate your analysis there. Former criminal barrister and author, thank you for that. We come back to Philip Ingram. Just to let you know, I mean, the killer has been seen by medical staff. He was taken out of court, is being removed. Let's be honest, couldn't care less about what state he's in. He's not eaten, he's whatever. But I don't care. I don't care. What we've heard in terms of him saying that he was glad that little girls were killed, that he asked the police, how young was the youngest child? And then smiling. I mean, there is no sense of remorse coming out here.
None whatsoever, and therefore no sentence is long enough. And I take my hat off to the court officials and to the police that are having to handle him for doing it in a professional way and not wanting to do anything to the individual, because no adult human being. It would be very difficult to hold yourself back with that. With an individual. I mean,
that is the thing, isn't it? There are some crimes, and again, and this is where that emotional reaction that we did have as a nation last July when this happened. Yes, there were people who just criminals. There were far-right people who wanted to stir up racial tension. There was a lot going on. But this sort of labelling, everyone's all far-right and awful for being angry about this. Now we're told by Keir Starmer, by the way, this week, that it's OK to be angry about it. We're right to be angry about it. I don't know how people can't be angry about this. I do genuinely think that there really has been a cover-up about the motivation for this crime. And again, we saw Twitter policing of the unrest on the streets. It wasn't just the far right. We've seen two-tiered justice in terms of the sentencing and even bringing charges at all. And I think we're seeing two-tiered treatment of people when it comes to things like prevent. And it's sort of, but he's only obsessed with white genocide. I do not believe that a white kid who had the same sort of stuff and was talking about there needs to be a black genocide or a Muslim genocide or anything like that in this country. I don't believe for a moment he'd have been treated the same way.
No,
I just don't.
He wouldn't have been. And Charlie Bentley-Astor's analysis of the white genocide side of things, that falls into the current definition by the CPS of terrorism. So we don't need to change the definition. This is where, and Keir Starmer will know that. He's supposed to be a barrister. He's supposed to be able to understand these things.
I mean, some of the details that have emerged, just the sentencing hearing is continuing. Killer is being seen by medical staff. That screams were heard within 30 seconds of killer entering the dance class. The yoga instructor, the woman who got stabbed, he's been admitted attempted murder of her. This is Leanne Lucas, that she felt the knife go into her back. Everyone else ran to the door of the dance class. She shouted at the children, just run away, run away. He chased them out. One little girl was seen on CCTV. Bearing in mind, these are primary school age children. One little girl seen on CCTV footage trying to leave the building, getting out of the building and being pulled back in by Rudakubana.
There's no words. There's no. There are no
you know me,
words.
I can yap for Britain, but.
Exactly, and I can't say in air what I'd want to do.
There are so many words. Should we take a break and we'll all just say off air what we want to say?
Can we pre-record it and then just put it out?
Yeah, probably could take it off air because God forbid you can't swear, because that would be the really bad thing. It would be equivalent to a hurty tweet while our children are being slaughtered. But what's a bit of slaughter between friends, eh? I mean, come on.